Hermann Prime and Zhuge Liang are the two strongest archer commanders in Rise of Kingdoms. There's pretty much no doubt about that. But what is the better of the two commanders for your account? And that's the question I'm going to be answering in today's video. Depending on the commanders you have and depending on where you are in the game, which commander is your better option? And I've done this with Zhuge and Hermann before, but I think Zhuge Liang and Hermann actually hold more importance. So I'm going to compare the commander's strengths and weaknesses and their best pairings to find out which commander is best for your account. So if you're looking to invest in Hermann or Zhuge Liang really soon, you want to stick around till the end of the video. Now let's start off with a quick breakdown of the strengths and weaknesses of both commanders, and first on the list is going to be Zhuge Liang. The first thing about Zhuge Liang that is just a complete strength is the fact that he's got ridiculous damage. I mean, Zhuge Liang's active skill damage, Zhuge Liang's fourth skill damage, Zhuge Liang's third skill damage, his expertise, everything here is just built around DPS. Everything in Zhuge Liang's kit is increasing the damage he deals. First of all, he's definitely got the strongest, or the second strongest AoE in the game, second to that of Lao Che, and he's also able to deal a massive debuff on the opponent, making him deal 15% less all damage for the next 3 seconds. Not to mention, he's got the 2000 damage 5 target AoE in a circle, which is just amazing. So Zhuge Liang's first real big advantage is just the amazing damage factor on his active skill, and also the really good debuff with it. The next real strength of Zhuge Liang is the fact that he does have a lot of archer health. With most archer commanders we see, like Henry, Boudica, Cyrus, YSG, Nebu, Ramses, even El Cid, Amanatori. I think Tamaris might have some health. No, she doesn't. So even Amanatori, Thutmose, and even Ditto has health. See, most of the commanders I list though, most of these archer commanders just do not have any form of health. So you'll notice that having health, especially 30% at all times on an archer commander, is a very strong thing to have, and it's definitely going to boost his effectiveness with a lot of other commanders. Also, Zhuge Liang has a chance to shrug off control effects, and while that's not the biggest thing nowadays since Guan Yu isn't really too meta anymore, we've seen a few control effects return with the new engineering commanders, so it's certainly nice being able to remove some of the control effects such as disarm with a passive skill slot, and you don't even have to level up that skill. So Zhuge Liang's got really good utility in that regard, not to mention the stats that do come with it. The next real strength of Zhuge Liang's kit is the fact that on his fourth skill here, he has an uninterrupted AoE. That means there is no basically reductions to this AoE, at least none are shown here. So you'll notice with all other AoEs in the game like YSGs, it reduces the damage to each additional target by 15%. It pretty much means that you won't get 2000 damage fact on every single target. You might end up with like 1100 on the final target you hit. And the one thing here with the fourth skill is to note that the AoE that Zhuge Liang is able to deal whenever he gets rid of his Marquis effect is actually a 1500 damage AoE to 3 targets with no reduction. It's a very strong AoE to have on a passive skill, and even if that was on a modern day commander with a fairly good kit, it would be relatively strong. I mean, it's like giving Nebuchadnezzar's AoE 2 less targets, but removing the damage reduction. So certainly it's a very powerful extra AoE to have, and it's going to give him a ton of extra kills on the open field, especially if you do have him expertise, where he will gain access to this Marquis effect pretty much instantly when he enters combat. Another thing I'd like to mention is Zhuge Liang's all damage is just very high. I mean, between his active skill reducing all damage and some all damage increases throughout his kit, not to mention the 10% increase on his fourth skill, Zhuge Liang has some of the highest all damage increases in the game, which once again is just going to boost his damage even further and allow him to deal a lot more damage to opponents on the open field. It's also important to note that the all damage boost here boosts his fourth skill's AoE because it's not affected by skill damage buffs, but it should be affected by any all damage boost that you do have. So boosting all damage on Zhuge Liang is very welcome, and it's going to allow him to once again deal a lot more damage to the opponents that you are fighting. So you can see really the biggest advantage with Zhuge Liang is just the crazy amount of damage he is able to deal, especially within a very short time frame. That being said though, there are 3 major like real disadvantages with Zhuge Liang's kit and stuff that is missing, and the first one is there's pretty much no tankiness. Besides the health on Zhuge Liang's kit, any commander that comes by can pretty much wipe him out super quickly because archers are already very squishy, and since he doesn't have anything such as a skill damage reduction like Henry does, or a normal damage reduction like, another skill damage reduction like Zhuge Prime, or even just something as simple as defense, Zhuge Liang is going to get wiped off the map pretty quickly, and he doesn't really have any revenge damage like Henry does either. So Zhuge Liang isn't a very tanky commander. He doesn't have anything that's like, if I get hit, it's not going to be worse. It's pretty much like, if I get hit, my trade's going to go to rubbish. So Zhuge Liang's biggest disadvantage is certainly the lack of tankiness, and this also can come down to the fact that he's got no defense and also has no march speed, which are very crucial stats. Almost all archer commanders have some form of defense. Even Cyrus on his expertise has defense, and almost every archer commander needs a lot of march speed. But because Zhuge Liang is pretty much a YSG 2.0, he doesn't have the march speed and doesn't have the defense to really be a standalone commander. He definitely needs to go with a more tanky primary commander to really perform well on the open field. Zhuge Liang also has one final issue, and that is his expertise is very essential. For him to gain this Marquis effect to allow him to deal the extra AoE on his 4th skill, he really needs to have the expertise. Otherwise, you have to be in combat for a very long time to get access to the Marquis effect, and it's about 2 skill cycles until you can do that, and that's a lot of time to be on the open field and fighting unless you get his expertise. So Zhuge Liang needs a fairly heavy investment to fully unlock all of his value. Now, as for the strengths for Hermann Prime and the weaknesses for Hermann Prime, we'll start off with his strengths. And the first strength in Hermann Prime is the fact that he easily has the strongest debuff in the game right now. I don't think there's really any other commander that's at the level of Hermann Prime in terms of the debuff, just because of how strong it really is. Hermann Prime's debuff is super simple. He deals 2 stacks of poison to the enemies for 10 seconds, and they can stack up to 15 times, and each poison increases the number of skill damage the target takes by 3%. Also, not only is this triggerable on the active skill, it's also able to be triggered on the 4th skill, even if you have 0 points in that skill. So Hermann Prime is able to literally dish out the best debuff in the game at only 5551, which is absolutely insane. The debuff Hermann Prime can inflict is up to 135% skill damage between all 3 targets he is fighting, so it is crazy how much skill damage boost you can really give your Murderable. Hermann Prime also does have a lot of defense and a lot of march speed, which once again make him a very strong commander and allow him to get away from some tough situations, or at least have a little bit of tankiness if it does get really rough. The last thing I do like about Zhuge Liang's kit is the passive defense reduction here with the AoE skill damage bonus. That just make him a little bit stronger on the open field, give him a bit more punch, and also improve his debuffs even further. Because you'll notice Hermann Prime is pretty much a Tamiris reskinned, because Tamiris, she has the poison effect, and also is dealing a defense reduction, albeit slightly stronger, but Hermann Prime's defense reduction is nonetheless still very powerful. The last real advantage to Hermann's kit, and this is probably the biggest one, is the fact that it can't really lose value. Unlike some other commanders like Ramses, where the defense reduction here is able to be replaced by stronger commanders like Nevsky, no matter who they release into the game, Hermann Prime's active skill debuff will always be pretty good, and there's a real simple reason for that. The poison effect here will stack, no matter what commander they release. If it has a poison effect, Hermann Prime's poison effect will still work with them. So for example, if Tamiris triggers a poison effect, and then Hermann triggers some poison effects, it doesn't cancel out the other one, it just adds them both and puts them onto the target, so he can't lose value there, and also his passive defense reduction cannot lose value as it's not on an active skill and will always remain as a possible thing. There are, though, a few disadvantages to Hermann's kit, and the first real 2 disadvantages, and these are going to be probably 2 larger disadvantages, is the fact he needs to be in combat for a very long time, for both his active skill to get full value, and also his 4th skill, and I guess also his expertise. A lot of Hermann Prime's skills require him to be in combat for like 5 to 10 skill cycles, which usually does not happen. First of all, with his active skill, the way it works is he stacks poison effects, and it's able to really increase his damage. And obviously that's really good if you're in a longer fight. But on the open field, usually you're not going to get as much value out of this, especially since most fights go for 1 skill cycle, maybe 2 at the maximum, especially in quick open field situations where you're hitting and running, hitting and running. Also, the Mandrake route is almost never going to get real value inside of the open field, unless you're able to basically negate some AoE damage whenever you basically put some poison effects on some targets. Or maybe whenever you have a longer engagement, you'll notice that he can somewhat become a little bit stronger with this Mandrake route. But once again, most engagements are pretty short, and the Mandrake route doesn't have time to really ramp up. The last real disadvantage, once again from his expertise, he needs to be in combat for a very long time. I think you can see a recurring trend here. Hermann is more of a long run commander, and that's not really something we like in Rise of Kingdoms. And the reason his expertise needs him to be in combat for a long time is he needs to put 25 stacks of poison on enemy troops for him to trigger his active skill twice. And if he leaves combat, this will reset the Give Me Back My Legions, and in turn will reset the poison stack. So you have to pretty much be in combat for like 4 to 5 skill cycles to really get the Give Me Back My Legions to actually work. I think it's around 4 skill cycles you'll have to be in combat. If you get pretty lucky, you can maybe do it in 3, but usually you'll have to go for around 4 skill cycles before you can double trigger his active skill. So now that we've talked about the advantages and disadvantages of both commanders, what do I think about when you should invest in this commander? And I think with Zhuge Liang, we'll start off with when you invest in him, and it's if you have any of the following commanders. If you have a Boudica Prime, if you have a Henry, if you have a Nebuchadnezzar, if you have a Gilgamesh or Ramses, if you have a El Cid, or an Edward of Woodstock or a Thutmose, Zhuge Liang is going to be your better investment. All the commanders I mentioned to you are much more tanky primary commanders who mostly have single target damage besides Nebuchadnezzar, because Zhuge Liang is bringing the DPS into the march. Commanders which have single target DPS and are also fairly tanky will be perfectly fine with the Zhuge Liang. So being able to pop up a bunch of tanky commanders like Henry or Boudica with Zhuge Liang means that he's going to get even more value. You'll also note that some of the other older commanders like Edward of Woodstock and El Cid were mentioned, and that's because they've both got a lot of march speed and a lot of defense, which once again can boost Zhuge Liang's kit to a next level. So you'll notice Zhuge Liang works a lot with some of the older archer commanders in the game, and it's just going to make him an overall stronger commander. If you wanted to invest in Hermann Prime, I'd say you want to have any of the following commanders. I want to say Cyrus is better with Hermann Prime, and Shobani Pal, Tamiris, and that's probably the main commanders. You'll notice I didn't speak about YSG because I'll talk about him in a minute, but Hermann Prime is a little bit more niche, so you'll notice not many commanders were mentioned for Hermann Prime, and that's because he definitely works well with more commanders like Zhuge Liang. He's better off with AoE damage, glass cannon commanders, rather than a commander who's more tanky like a primary like Boudica Prime. So you'll never really notice Hermann Prime being the best investment if you already have access to a Boudica or a Henry, who are going to not be bad with Hermann Prime, but he's not going to be very overpowered. So I think commanders like Henry and Boudica are just better off with a Zhuge Liang than they would be with a Hermann, and it's going to get your murder ball a little bit more value than it would with a Hermann Prime. So you'll notice tanky primary commanders really do end up with Zhuge Liang, and then the more glass cannon commanders end up with Hermann Prime. The next thing I would like to talk about is YSG, because I think this is where I get the most questions about which archer commander to get. And YSG, usually I recommend to go with Hermann Prime, and it's for a really simple reason. Hermann Prime does everything that YSG needs. Hermann boosts AoE skill damage, Hermann's able to give you all damage reductions, he's able to give you march speed and defense, he's able to give you a fairly decent AoE, and he's just all around very, very strong with YSG. I'd say arguably it's a more sustainable and easier to use march than a YSG with a Zhuge Liang. So pretty much whenever you're coming out of Season 2 or Season 3 and you need to pick your first archer commander, if you have a YSG at expertise or near expertise, I always recommend just to get Hermann Prime, since it's going to be better with YSG than YSG would be with Zhuge Liang. Zhuge Liang with YSG is just too slow, and even though the damage is crazy high, if you get even looked at funny on the open field, the march is pretty much going to die there. So I would definitely recommend trying to get Hermann Prime instead of Zhuge Liang if you do want to get a YSG. That being said though, you can certainly run a Zhuge Liang YSG, that's why I'm not saying it's a one-off thing. You can still consider getting Zhuge Liang if you really, really want him to run with your YSG, because it's still a possible pairing, it's just a little bit more annoying to run, and it's much less forgiving on mistakes. So for example, if you walk slightly too far in the enemy murder ball with a Zhuge Liang YSG, you're going to be absolutely killed, and if you're not destroyed, you'll end up at like half units or below half units, probably in the red. But with Hermann Prime and a YSG, you can often get away from some more slightly tough situations, than you could with a Zhuge Liang, just because of how slow the march really can become. If you are running like the triple line formation, I mean, Zhuge Liang could work there, but once again, probably not the most powerful thing to use. You're probably better off with stuff like wedge formation to increase damage, but triple line can make the march a little bit more forgiving if you do make a few mistakes on the open field. So now, as a quick recap, if you have any of the following commanders, you will invest in Hermann Prime, pretty much hands down. If you have access to a Shurbanipal YSG Cyrus, or if you have access to a Tamiris, I would recommend getting a Hermann Prime over any of the other archer commanders. If you have any of the following commanders, you're pretty much going to expertise as Zhuge Liang, and those commanders are Henry, Boudica Prime, Nebuchadnezzar, Gilgamesh, Ramses, El Cid, Edward of Woodstock, Thutmose, and also possibly Artemisia if you do have her, but most people won't use her. So you'll notice Zhuge Liang definitely has more coverage with a lot more archer commanders under his wing, but Hermann Prime does have access to YSG being his better pairing, so I think we'll notice more people will be running Hermann Prime nowadays than they will Zhuge Liang, since a lot of people have an expertise YSG who they've just been bouncing around with the new, stronger archer commanders. So for most players, Hermann Prime is probably going to be the better choice, but if you have other commanders like Boudica or Henry already expertised and you want an upgrade, you'll want to go with the Zhuge Liang over the Hermann Prime. Now, if you enjoyed today's video, I just want to ask you guys for a very small favor, and that is consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. If you're watching this video, I'm guessing you're making archer marches and you're trying to get value from your archer marches, and my channel is going to be one of, if not the best places to do that. So if you want help with your archer commanders, or you just want some reassurance that you're going down the right path, do consider subscribing to the channel. I make as many videos as I can on archer commanders, on infantry, cavalry. I even discuss new updates and features and stuff that come to the game. So if you want honest, raw opinions on updates, if you want pure advice, then do subscribe to the channel. It will be very, very worth it. It also does help support me make content, and to the people who just subscribed, it is very much appreciated. And to all the previous subscribers, I thank you as well. Now, I just want to say thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.